Let's see, I would like to welcome everyone to TEK as Resilient Embodied Democracy. In this presentation, we will hear Dr. Joseph Gazingwolf speak about the resilient democratic governance inherent in tech of Indigenous peoples, which may help to stifle autocratic advance and support Western democracy. We will open up discussions to a question and answer session after the presentation. So please add your questions directly to the Q&A box so they can be addressed at that time. Dr. Gazingwolf, you may now begin this session.
Thank you. Let me just clarify. I'm only a student. I have not received my doctorate yet, but I appreciate the vote of confidence. It'll happen someday. So hopefully I'm sharing my screen. Let's try to.
Yep, it looks good.
Okay, great. It's hard to navigate this with, I'm used to having several screens, so here we go. Okay. Okay, well, thanks for that lovely introduction, and thanks for having me. I should probably say I grew up mostly as just a traditional knowledge holder. I'm a rancher and farmer. I barely have joined the academic community, and so I'm going to kind of, if you will, give the view from the ground rather than the 30,000-foot view that academics tend to take. I don't have the language for it. I don't understand the language. I'm just a buffalo rancher. So I'll talk about kind of why I became interested in democracy via my own kind of lived experience, and then talk about, you know, in what way democracy becomes embodied and why that's important, and then in what way it becomes a resilient form of democracy as well, right? And how all of that is part and parcel of what it means to be a traditional knowledge holder, right? To practice TEK, not just talk about it. So let's see, here we go. Okay. So I like languages, so I like to nerd out on language. The life of a range rider, which I'll explain what that is later, is pretty quiet, and so it gave me a lot of time to learn what I wanted to learn and read voraciously and explore. So ego sum homo indomitus, that means I am a savage, and I wear that badge proudly. Indomitus, of course, is where we get the word indomitable, and Indigenous people are certainly an indomitable force on this planet, and have been so for millennia upon millennia. So you also get words like we've been called and have been known as Silvaticus, of the woods, or Sauvage, where we get the word savage from, and that's of course of the wilderness. And so I wear all those labels very proudly, and see no shame in them whatsoever. And let me just make that small. Here we go. And you know, these terms, of course, have been used to dehumanize us as a collective, and you know, to describe us as unfeeling or brutal or cruel. And so I'm going to demonstrate how cruel I am and unfeeling I am as an Indigenous person in a minute. But yes, I do wear this title very proudly. I'm also a descendant of the Berber people of Northern Africa via my mother's people. And so that's where we get the word barbarian from as well. Again, another negative term, or has been used negatively to describe you know, people who are strangers or non-Christians, right? Strangers to civilization, if you will. And again, used circa the 1600s to describe our people as being either unfeeling or cruel, etc. And again, via my mother, I like to joke and say that I'm the original nigga in terms of the first recorded use of that word. It describes my people in Upper Egypt, my mother's people in Upper Egypt, and so you know, back home in the Dakotas, my other homeland, amongst the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, many times when I'm out in the field, people drive by in trucks and yell, prairie nigger or red nigger or something of that sort. And so I'm used to that terminology, and again, I wear it very proudly. It's not something that offends me at all. That Hebrew at the bottom there, again, just being a language nerd, is from the Song of Songs, one of the most beautiful poems ever written, and it's Shechora Ani Dena'ava, which means black am I, but beautiful. So my story, my narrative began here in a place called Garbage City in Egypt, in Upper Egypt. This is Lower Egypt, Northern Egypt. It's on the outskirts of Cairo. Native people, indigenous people from Upper Egypt, who were displaced because of the building of the Aswan Dam. The Nile flooded and displaced us that way in order to create electricity for the Egyptian government. And so we were displaced and we were forcibly removed from our lands and taken to the outskirts of Cairo. Well, the only way that shepherds and pastoralists can survive is we started collecting trash from Cairo. So we became the trash people, the garbage collectors. And since there is no infrastructure to actually get rid of trash, we built our entire city out of trash, right? There's only one place we can take it, and that's home. And so this is where I grew up eating rotting food that was left over in people's trash, et cetera, right? And it took my father, after he and my mother married and he had me, it took him about 10 years to get us out of Egypt, thanks to the Egyptian government. So this is where I grew up for about the first 6 years of life. And then farmers from Upper Egypt, essentially the people who displaced us, the people who took our lands and displaced us, would go into the inner cities and hire homeless children in order to get free labor, right? So they would hire us during busy seasons in order to get free labor, and then give us room and board in return. So it was an upgrade for me, certainly. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a plant. It was the first time I'd ever seen water, first time I'd ever seen animals in my life, right? When you grow up in a landfill, there isn't much that's alive there. So going from Garbage City to Upper Egypt, to my people's land, what was once my people's land, and seeing the immense beauty and majesty and mystery of the land was like being on a different planet. And so from that day on, I kind of, first of all, I dreaded going back for good reason, but also vowed to reclaim my people's land, and as well as preserve this beauty across the world wherever I was. So. And then finally, when I was 10, my father was able to bring us back home to Standing Rock, my other home. My father was a rancher by trade, and so he ranched buffalo and cattle, and so we were brought up working the land that way, within the, of course, confines of our traditional ways. So. My mother and he were deeply in love, and so he would never leave her. He refused to leave her in Egypt, her and I in Egypt, and so he sacrificed a large portion of his life to bring her and myself here. So I grew up, like I said, buffalo ranching most of my life, and learned the ways of my people, the Lakota, and attempted as much as I can to practice them within the many confines that are placed on us as ranchers within a broader Western economy and Western market, right? So did what we could to restore buffalo to the land, and many other species as well at Standing Rock and other places that I'll talk about shortly. And so reestablished my own personal relationship with the buffalo, with an adopted relative, which is the horse, right? So the important idea to communicate here that there are many relatives that we have on the land that are not native, but have become such a part of us that we consider them essential relatives, right? So for all our allies and non-Indigenous people here, it doesn't mean that you're not a relative and that you're not valued. You certainly can be and are. And so I worked, unfortunately, when my parents passed away, they adopted me when they were in their 60s, and so when they passed away, it was hard for me to kind of to deal with it because they were the only people in my life so far that had showed me any compassion, and so I took the opportunity to kind of reassess what my life meant and where it was heading. So so I left the res and started working all across the country and in different parts of the world as well, to kind of for reasons I'll share in a minute, but grew different crops, managed different types of herds all across the nation and in other countries. And so there are several things that I learned that I'll share with you as I experienced these things and grew in my relationship to Mother Earth in many ways. The first thing that you learn especially when you're out on the plains, is that Mother Earth is not always nice. She's sometimes very rugged and harsh, and so learning to adapt to those conditions and understanding that she does this for a reason, right? She does this to encourage resilience within us as a people. And to kind of teach us our place within this cycle of life that she's created for us. So you can see in the bottom right there, the cabin that I lived in, right? So one of the things that you learn when you live this type of life, where you're living on the land directly, and it's direct, intimate, relational contact with the land, is you take what you need. Right, you learn to only take what you need. Right, so I didn't need any more of a footprint on the planet than that little cabin, just to protect myself from blizzards like the one going on in that picture. So that's an important lesson that I learned from there. And again, learning to adapt to conditions. So it's not surprising to understand that Indigenous, or to look and see that Indigenous people and tribal communities all over the world, moved across their ancestral lands, depending on temperature variations, precipitation variations, etc. Right. So as Mother Earth did her thing, we responded, right, and we adapted. And so, depending on where I was on the landscape, I either needed fire at night, or I needed simply couldn't make fire because I was camping out on 6-foot beds of snow. As a range rider, you learn that you need insulation, for example. Right? So there's a lot of adaptation that needs to take place as the environment changes, and that's when we talk about that in TUK all the time. Right? That it's a constant flux of relationality. The other thing that Mother Earth taught me is how little I am in the grand scheme of things, right? So, big sky country, that's the Lakota ancestral lands there. And when you look up at a sky like this every night or every day, you realize, wow, I am just a tiny blip on the map, environmentally and ecologically speaking. And so, not letting your ego grow is very important in this context, and Mother Nature teaches you that as you continue in this intimate relationship with her. So knowing our place and knowing that we are a tiny blip on the timeline of things is very important. And so this is why I sort of I try not to haughtily scoff, but I try to, but it's sometimes difficult when Western scientists use terms like the Anthropocene and talk about how humans are just dominating everything, and we're the primary driver of this, that, and the other thing. I mean, sure, we're the primary destroyer, right? We've certainly come up with technologies that can destroy very quickly. But that just, to me, speaking of something like an Anthropocene, is just another demonstration of arrogance. You know, we're just going to self-destruct. Mother Nature is going to be here, and she's going to be just fine without us. If anything's going to happen, it's going to be us killing ourselves off in our own stupidity. So we're not that important in the grand scheme of things. But at the same time, when you look up at a sky like this, what she's telling you too is that you are a valuable part of the narrative, right? You are a valuable part of this, but not so important that you dominate everything and have such a dramatic impact on everything. The other thing you learn is that you're not alone, right? That you, besides your human tribe, you also have many other tribes around you that serve important purposes and are an integral part, once again, even if they're non-native, right? So all of these creatures that I showed here are not native to the plains, but they play key roles in making my way of life and the human tribe's way of life possible, right? So whether it be cats on the farm or the ranch that help to control rodent species, whether it be dogs that shepherd our sheep and our goat, and of course horses that are our work partners. So the other thing, being a traditional knowledge holder and living that embodied democracy means that we don't leave the vulnerable behind, right? So I will leave as a shepherd. If I'm a good shepherd, I will leave the herd, which is self-contained and can protect itself, and go and chase after the one lost sheep, right? The one lost member of the herd. I'll dismount my horse and run after her and grab her, right? So it's important that if we're going to embody democracy, that we don't leave behind the forgotten ones, the ones that we don't even know exist, right? Like homeless children in Garbage City. We don't leave behind people that are often forgotten about, or the hundreds of thousands of people who are starving in Yemen right now. While we turn our attention to what's going on in Ukraine, there are many other people who are starving to death. So it's important that we keep that consciousness of what's going on in the world around us, and that we don't leave behind the most vulnerable amongst us. It's also important to recognize that this land is not my land, not my land alone, right? So in Indigenous communities, we, at least I should say in Indigenous academic communities, there's a lot of talk about whose land is this and respecting land and all that good stuff, and that's wonderful. As a traditional knowledge holder, however, I'm always seeking permission to enter into any tribe's territory, right, including the animals that I myself shepherd, right? So anytime I enter a pasture or a paddock or wherever I happen to be, when I'm entering, I seek permission, right? Once the leaders of that land, of that place, invite me in, then I consider myself a welcome guest, right? So it is important that we actually live in relationality to the tribes that make up this planet. And then recognizing that there's, a lot of them are doing incredibly important work, right, that I don't see and I'm not conscious of even on a day-to-day basis, right? So as I'm out on the prairie, there are many other tribes that are doing important work out there, and to recognize them and to recognize their efforts, and to make sure that they have the proper habitat, the proper food sources, water access, things like that, in order for them to continue to do that work and to continue to live on their land as well. And again, many of them living different life cycles and contributing in different ways, right? So depending on where they are in their own life cycle, they might have different jobs, right? So you might get a mother mountain goat, for example, who is shepherding her offspring and needs a different type of habitat and protection at that moment. versus the vultures who are the cleanup crew, right? The true garbage people of the world who help to protect us from disease and et cetera, right? So depending on where in the life cycle of the different tribal communities I live with, and what their current needs happen to be, then I respond accordingly, right? As one member of one tribe on this landscape. Same thing with many other wild partners who do important work and are often villainized, right? So many times, at least in Western narratives, many of these folks here that you see are treated as the big bad wolf or the devil serpent, etc. And to understand that they are key partners in making landscapes democratic landscapes, right? So if I'm going to live an embodied democracy, I need to understand that I am one member of a broader community that is incredibly diverse, and that all the rights of these different communities need to be protected as well. And of course, one of the things that Mother Nature teaches us is that every day is Valentine's Day, and it's not a constant fighting and struggling and seeking of rights and seeking of land and all of that kind of stuff. But there are many sweet moments of love and compassion that take place, and that Mother Nature would teach us if we only would pay attention and listen. And of course, traffic can be a cow sometimes when you're out there. So there's also an important aspect to TEK, which is comedy, and an important aspect that's often forgotten, right? So making fun of ourselves, maintaining our humility, and again our positionality in the great scheme of things means that we are able to make fun of ourselves, and that our egos are not allowed to grow too large, right? So comedy is a very important thing and important to maintain. So what does it all mean, right? If I take these lessons to heart and try to pursue them in life to live a meaningful life, what does it mean for me? Well, it means I need to learn. It's incumbent upon me to learn skills that I'm able to give back to the land and to the tribes and to the communities that I serve. And so, whether it be construction trades, we're able to build infrastructure that's necessary so you can build habitat for humans and more than human relatives, or anything else, right? The ability to manage land in a good way. All these things are important skills, and again, it's a requirement, right? It's a responsibility, right? We use that term responsibility in TEK, where we talk about our responsibility back to the land, right? What responsibility do we have as members of one tribe among many others? So, one of those responsibilities, again, may be that I see the potential in a member of a community that community does not see, right? So much like my father saw potential in me as a child, and his love for my mother, made him sacrifice so much of his own life to give us a better one. It's as I walk through the landscape, and what I'm looking out for is to see that the most vulnerable members of that landscape are given a chance, right? Given a chance to live out whatever their purpose in life happens to be. So this would be, a great anathema as an ecologist, right? How dare you pick up an orphaned bird, an orphaned hawk off the floor, and feed her and train her to become a partner raptor, who she shined as she's a goshawk, and she shined as a partner in controlling certain rabbit and other rodent species across the landscape with me, and she became an excellent partner in doing so. And so I understand the idea of, like, you don't help you let nature take its course. I get that as an ecologist. It's difficult to put into practice when you can see the potential as you relate to the members of this collective community, when you see the potential in those who are most vulnerable and in the most vulnerable situations sometimes. And speaking of the most vulnerable folks, at least within human communities, of course, it tends to be children. And so much of my life's work has centered around Indigenous children across the world. And so I've been to everywhere from Mexico to Guatemala to Peru to all over North Africa to East Asia, Japan, etc., and worked with tribal communities there to improve the well-being and quality of life for future generations. And that's part, again, of the reciprocity, of the giving back of the gifts that I've received, right? So I received the gift of life, nearly starved to death 3 times in the first 5 years of life, living in Garbage City. And if it wasn't for compassionate people feeding me, taking me in, sheltering me, etc., I wouldn't be alive today for sure. And so realizing that that's not just a gift I take and then say, oh, well, I'm going to go, become a multimillionaire and like live a lavish lifestyle and enjoy every day of my life, right? That you hear that hippie shit in Western context of like, oh, you got to enjoy every day. Every day is a gift. And all that means is they focus on themselves and buy themselves more shit and all that kind of stuff. Well, no, living every day when you understand that life is a gift means that you give that gift to others, right? You share that gift with others. And same thing with my work with women that have experienced abuse or violence, both physical and sexual abuse. I've worked for over 30 years now in domestic violence and sexual assault programming and shelters. And so here, in this particular case, it happens to be with the Oglala Lakota, but I've also worked with the YWCA Wings program in California, and they're actually, I think, a national program as well. And use whatever skills I had, right? So, carpentry skills, to, learned quite a lot about healthy relationships from my parents. And so I would give talks about healthy relationships and how to carry those on. I worked with young boys so that the cycle of violence does not continue, right? To kind of embody for them what a real man looks like. And so it's important that, once again, to use whatever skills you have to provide for the needs of your people. So, and same thing again with housing and as well as different public projects that needed to be done. So whether I would recruit as many of my people and of other people of good allies that would join us to do things like go to Indigenous places in Mexico and Guatemala and other places and build homes, or do it back home at Standing Rock, or do it on the left hand side there, putting in some stairs in the Badlands so that the tribal communities there can have access to forage for some of the traditional plants that we forage for back home. So projects like that, again, using your skills to give back to communities is how you embody democracy. And if you notice in the picture in the upper right, you don't have to be an asshole to do all this work, right? You don't have to be a serious jerk to everybody just because you're the social justice warrior or whatever you call yourself. You can do it dressed as a clown, right? And so every time we would go on one of these trips, I would take a clown costume with me, and I would have the children especially vote who's going to wear the clown costume. And almost inevitably it was me, because I was always the clown. Before putting on the costume, I was always the idiot who was willing to make an idiot out of himself. So it's really, again, I want to emphasize, you don't need to be a dick to do this kind of work. You can do a lot of good in the world. Hopefully, what I've done is good, but you can do a lot of good in the world while still having a smile on your face and being a jerk, a funny jerk. And speaking of skill development, you can combine skills with community development or relational development, right? So like I said, I've traveled all over the world. And let me make a side point here. When I talk about this, And this is like only the second time I've ever shared this with people. But when I talk about this, people tend to think that I come from some kind of privileged background, right? That I must have lots of money. I haven't to this day, and I'm happy to share my taxes with you. I have not lived above the poverty line a single year in my life thus far. So maybe next year, hopefully, I'm getting a job with the Nature Conservancy, and I might actually make an income that's above the poverty line finally. So if your excuse is, well, I don't have the finances to do all of this kind of work, neither do I. But it's important that you talk with people. It's important that you are open with folks, and that you share your story, and that you listen to theirs in return, right? So this is where all that came from. And so in the lower right there, I'm with stonemasons in Egypt who actually work on the pyramids, right? So the Egyptian government hires traditional stonemasons to build and refurbish the pyramids that make them a lot of money. Of course, they use them as like slave trade, pretty much. And the bottom left, same thing with all the Latinos, many of whom are indigenous people who grow our food, right? And went out and worked with them in the fields. And I can tell you, I have a different appreciation for lettuce, like a lettuce crop like that they're harvesting. I have a different appreciation for it after I bend over and stand up 12,000 times in a day. And these people realizing that these people are literally putting themselves in wheelchairs in order to feed us. And so but you're not going to understand that until you feel it in your own body, first and foremost. So, and then I lived in Japan and worked with Japanese master woodworkers, and that's one of the pieces I made there, a three-dimensional wood image that's in one of the Buddhist temples there now. So many of these stories of skill development, but skill development in the context of building relationships, knowing what these people's lived experiences are like, gives me a perspective of understanding that we are all interconnected. And so if I live my life in a way where everything is about me, everything is about my tribe, right? And I don't see how my tribe is connected to what's going on in Ukraine. It's connected to the people dying in Yemen, connected to the indigenous folks who suffer all over the world, and whose important, valuable labor is undervalued. If I don't understand how I'm interconnected with these people, it's kind of like we're all competing for seats on the Titanic, right? It's asinine. Right? It's asinine to talk about interconnectivity of ecological matter and blah, 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 and how we're all related to animals and blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden, when it comes to, okay, how are we as humans interconnected to one another? The dialogue just comes to a grinding halt, right? So it's important. And again, it's talky is very easy, but to actually live this out is a different matter. And so what does that look like even more so? Well, it looks like things like in the upper left corner there, me being in the back of a truck when the state of Israel yet again slaughters indigenous Palestinians at will. I'm there to take the women and children out and to transport them via truck to a safer place, right? To be there, right? To be there and to be present to the people's needs, like in the bottom right corner where indigenous people in Upper Egypt, my own people, the Nubians, have no rights, especially if they're persons with disabilities. There's absolutely no access to services, all the privileges that persons with disabilities have here in our context. I'm not monitoring time, so can you just cut me off, Laura? Just feel free to cut me off, please. It's hard for me.
We're paying attention to time, don't worry.
Okay, thank you. So providing somebody with crutches who can't walk because he had a disease early on in his life, that kind of thing. All these things are very important, right? Knowing what people need and how they need it, and then overthrowing authoritarian governments. When you allow, when you have persisted in your non-relationality to place long enough to where you have allowed authoritarians to take complete control over your country and over your tribe, it you then corner yourself into having to resort to violence in order for you to feed your children, right? So when the Egyptians got to the point where they were starving to death, like, oh, maybe we should overthrow Hosni Mubarak, who's like a fucking tyrant and who's like, you know, taking $2 billion a year from the United States and pocketing it, right? And so I was there and had my eyes burned out by a bomb that went off. But the idea is that you need to understand that when you allow things to progress and go to sleep, because hey, I can buy an iPhone today, so why should I worry what's happening in Washington, right? Okay, I mean, you can live that way, but one day you're going to find white men with rifles at your doorstep telling you can't be gay anymore, or can't say gay anymore, right? Or can't be a woman anymore, right? Or we're just gonna, if you are a woman, you need to dress from head to toe and you can't, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we're heading in that direction. If you're paying attention, we're heading in that direction very quickly. And that's because most of us have completely neglected our democratic ways, which are our indigenous democratic ways, right? The so-called founding fathers of America borrowed many ideas about democracy from us, from the Iroquois and many other indigenous nations. So, you know, if you think democracy is this Western invention, you need to learn more about your people. It's very important that you understand that democracy is also relational. And when you abuse her, when you neglect her, she's thrown the ring in your face and she's walking out. So we're at that point, right? She's leaving you and she's walking out. You know, what are you doing about it? Okay, I'm gonna skip through a lot of this stuff, but important to understand that you need people power anytime you're in a context where you're trying to do something good and positive. The first question I ask is, where are the people? What communities do I need to connect with? Human and more than human alike, what communities can I bring in here to help me do this work and to complete the vision, right? So, and then requiring, you know, service in return. So reciprocity, right? When I rehabilitate a horse that's been abused or neglected, I expect him or her to come out on the field and work with me, right? So if I'm going to give, I expect in return from you as well. Learning about our democracy and the history of democracy in this nation and how it was structured, and taking an honest look at who we are, like the fact that our first president used to take his slaves across the Pennsylvania border every 5 months and 29 days, because if he had left them there for 6 months, they would have become free people, right? So Washington, is he a real hero? I don't know. I don't know to talk about him that way. He did some good things, but taking an honest look at where our history has been, and then where our current situation is, right? And that there's still a grotesque racism and white supremacy all around us. It's carved in our most sacred hills. It's in our face loudly everywhere we go. And so important to do that. I'm not going to talk about modeling because that's a personal journey of overcoming, my own journey of people telling me I'm ugly and et cetera. But this is a double entendre of, we need to model for future generations through our own struggles, right? So if you're like me and you're the typical Indigenous person who's been told you're ugly and you're short and you're stupid and all these things, I'm still incredibly uncomfortable standing in front of a camera, even with friends, standing in front of the camera. And so I've been working through that psychologically by allowing people who say, hey, I want to take a picture of you for my magazine, to do so, and putting myself in those uncomfortable situations to kind of overcome the false narratives that I've been fed over time. So anyway, I was going to go through and talk about all the things I've learned from Buffalo, like the fact that they're a matriarchal tribe, and but that males, notice the big bull that's right behind the females up front here, play an important role as well in responding to when the women tell them to do something, right? So, being a Buffalo rancher, I've learned quite a bit from Buffalo in terms of what a healthy tribe looks like, right? So the fact that women lead, they tell the tribe when to settle, when to move, where to go for water, when to feed, etc. And the men are there right behind them, right? So it's not that they're off in a distant place somewhere, acting like fools, but they're right behind them, ready to support. And of course, compassion for the next generation and the important narrative of motherliness, very important in this tribe. Learning who you can walk with is very important. And then taking time to rest, right? So they've taught me quite a bit that, you can be this giant titan of the prairie, right? This giant muscular beast and still need a lot of rest and making sure that you take care of yourself and your mental and physical health. And then the way they manage land is always heterogeneous, right? So this idea of heterogeneity is something that we've used in ecology that ecologists have just barely learned. The Tatanka have known this for millennia, right? That you manage land through heterogeneity, through their buffalo wallows and et cetera. Don't beware of hitchhiking buffalo. You don't want to take them in your car. And then again, cuteness and comedy, right? So these massive beasts of the prairie, these giants can also be cute and adorable and have a sense of humor and play around, right? And then give of their life for the tribe, right? Give of their life for other tribes. We honor their life, and they give us sustenance every day via the food that we eat. And then I'll leave this up to we can go to question and answer and discussion at this point, but I'll leave it here and kind of incorporate this into the Q&A.
Thank you so much for that lovely presentation.
Thank you.
We are ready to take some questions, I believe. So let me see if there are questions in the Q and answer. Yes, we have a couple. First question is, I have missed a couple of the presentations, but I'm sincerely enjoying the discussions. What I haven't heard mentioned, though, is any discussion about the sheer number of humans we have on our planet and what TEK might be able to discuss about that.
Yeah, so there are several ideas there. One is that when we began, so anthropologists will say, the biggest error that humans ever made was agriculture, because it allowed us to grow in population, right? It allowed us to settle down and grow in population. There's a lot of truth to that, certainly. But I think where we are now, the point where we've come now, the most important thing is to educate women, and there's tons of evidence that as women become more educated across the world, that they tend to have fewer children, and tend to be less subjugated to patriarchal forces across the world. And so I think that is our prime tool, our prime method that we can use to control human population. But you're absolutely right. I mean, by some estimates, we're 14 times the human load on the planet that is sustainable. And so, yeah, there definitely are issues around human population.
All right, we have a question from Jessica Hernandez. In discourses of TEK, there is still this exclusion of Afro-Indigenous TEK for many reasons, including anti-Blackness. What is one message you have in regards to this exclusion, and what can non-Black Indigenous peoples do to make sure your message is heard and uplifted?
Yeah, so I've felt it keenly in terms of experiencing anti-Black racism within my own tribal community as well. My mother, seeing my mother being disrespected, being a Black woman, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, and this is why I commented earlier on that it's incredibly foolish and makes no sense for me when we talk about a relationality to Mother Earth, or a relationality to ecological landscapes and all the living forces within those landscapes, except for these humans, right? Except for other humans. Like, who gives a shit what's going on in Ukraine or anywhere else, right? And why should we care what's happening to Black people in America? if we're going to actually practice TEK, then let's practice TEK, or let's shut up, right? Let's shut up about it and not talk about it if we're not going to practice it. And so understanding my relationality to all the tribes and nations all across the world. And when these types of injustices are happening right here at home, right? When they're happening right on my ancestral land, where Black people are being murdered by cops, for example, what sort of, we all believe in spirits, right? We all believe in energies and spirits and ancestors. Are we really honoring our ancestors when we allow people to be murdered? Are we really honoring ancestors, when we allow people to live in abject poverty all across our lands, right? So if we're going to say these are our lands, right? The Northern Plains are Lakota land, and I will take my last fucking breath saying that. If I'm going to say that, though, I'm going to live that. And if I'm going to live that, it means that I'm not okay with vulnerable populations living in poverty. I'm not okay with police forces killing people because of the color of their skin. All those things are not okay with me. You're on my land, right? So if you're going to actually take ownership and keep talking about land back and all of these kinds of things, fantastic. I'm 100% with you, but you better do it right.
Thank you. An anonymous attendee asks the question, do you teach about these things at the university level? Wapila, for all the work you have done and are doing.
Thank you. Wapila Tanka. Yeah, I try to. I try to teach about these things, but I'm also very careful, especially when, I've only felt comfortable sharing part of my personal life in these talks a couple of times. This is only the second time doing this. The first time was talking with just Indigenous elders, and so it's I'm careful how I do it, and you'll notice I don't show any pictures of my family, etc., and block people's faces out. I try to protect. So it's important. Yes, I try to do it, but I have to be very careful how I do it, because when you talk about living this stuff rather than just writing books about it, you have to show that you've lived it, right? So the one thing I try not to be is a damn hypocrite. It's my big red button. The way that you can piss me off or I piss myself off is if I act like a hypocrite. So I never tell people to do anything that I haven't done myself. And in general, I don't tell people what to do. I just share my story, and if you like it, try to live it yourself in your own unique way, or not. But yeah, I try to do it in roundabout ways in the Western Academy, because I'm trying to be protective of myself and my people as well. Mm-hmm. So.
All right, on to the next question. Kathy Avera asks the question, what do you feel is a way for an individual to help promote resilient democracy other than being a non-racist, good-giving person?
Yeah, so many things. So like what I have up on the screen here, right? Taking your professional ethics seriously, right? So the gentleman on the left is Eugene Goodman. Most people still don't know who he is, which is shocking. And then Stanislav Petrov on the right there. Eugene Goodman is the reason that we still have democracy these past couple of years, right? He put his life on the line to save people that don't value his life in Congress. And he reacted via his training in the moment to save the life of the Vice President of the United States and many other folks in Congress. And so taking your professional ethics seriously, Stanislav Petrov is the reason that we're all alive, because he disobeyed orders as an officer in the Russian Navy, I believe, and didn't alert the Russian government to what he was receiving a false message that the United States had launched nuclear weapons. And so his job was to say, hey, launch back, right? Launch all the nuclear weapons we have back at the United States. And he refused that order. And he's the reason you and I are alive. And he's lived a hell of a fucking life after that. He was incredibly ostracized. And nobody has ever heard about this gentleman, but he's the reason you and I are still alive, and we still live on a planet with animals and plants and shit on it, right? So it's important that we take professional ethics seriously, do things like, defend journalism, right? Independent journalism, and make sure that it becomes a viable, livable way to be, right? So a livelihood, a sustainable livelihood for journalists and protection for them is very important. They're being murdered all over the place, like in Mexico, for example. Doing things like getting involved politically. So getting involved politically, right? So I'm not going to tell you to do something that I don't do. That's Nina Turner right there, the senator from Ohio, and if you believe in the message that people are putting out, go support them, show up, and make sure you show up to vote. Get involved in politics at the local level yourself, right? Become a leader, become a political leader yourself at the local level. Many of my sisters back home are doing this very thing. They're becoming representatives of their districts, etc. Right? So very, very important, right? Don't just look up to people like Deb Haaland and say, hey, yeah, we made it. No, we haven't made anything, right? You need way, way, way more Native people in positions of power like that. And so, taking the time to find out how you can do that and gain leadership within your own tribes, but also outside of your own tribes is important.
We have a comment from Chrisette. Thank you for sharing your unique story. I appreciate the perspective on four-legged tribes. The knowledge was shared with me that we had treaties with them. We are breaking those treaties with the way we practice ag, confining animals and monocrops.
Yeah.
And an anonymous attendee asks the question, how were you able to do the things you do while having such a low income?
Yeah, so again, building coalitions. So and more importantly, not just building coalitions, but learning how to live on very little, right? And I have to give it to Mother Nature for giving me the initial life that I had, because I learned to live on very little early on, and so I've carried that with me, right? So I'm able to camp out anywhere I go. I don't need accommodations. I eat very little, which is healthy for me, etc. So at this point, I can live on, I don't know, $8,000 to $10,000 a year, given, with inflation, that's going to go up a little bit, but I can live on very little, and so I'm not beholden to my job. I'm not beholden to the powers that be in any way. I can live on very little, right? So that's if I can leave you one message of how you're able to do that, you do it that way, and then you find opportune times, right? So if you're going to travel, there are many tools that you can use online to find incredibly cheap flights, and things like that. And again, having partners and friends all over the world, very important. And I gained those partners and friends via the experiences I bothered to engage in. Right, so opening myself up to people around me, talking, hey, where are you from? What's your story? Tell me more about your life. And simple conversations like that, which are virtually non-existent today because everybody's on their fucking phone. There's you're gonna miss out on a whole lot of life and wake up one day, find yourself in your deathbed on your phone, probably watching other people live, and that's incredibly unfortunate. So put your damn phone down, turn to the people next to you and ask questions, right? Like, hey, who are you? Where do you work? What are you up to? What's the meaning of life, right? Those kinds of things.
Chrisette also makes a comment and about population size, which isn't so much an issue as consumption. Now we're looking at forced pregnancy and parenting without consent. We might see a dramatic population increase. I agree, it might be time to take a lesson from Egypt and burn it down.
Well, sorry. Yeah, I would caution against that, only because I would caution against that. A lot of folks who talk about revolution who've never been part of one, there's always what happens afterwards, right? Even if you're successful, which is going to cost a lot of good lives, right? So are you prepared to lose your own life? Are you prepared to watch your children die, right? If those of you who are like gung-ho about revolution, you don't understand them, right? I don't think you understand what it means. Are you ready to watch your elders die? Because some of them might. So I would caution you to have that mentality of let's burn this bitch down. I get to that place sometimes in my mind too, but then I remember my experiences, and what we need to do is is have a vision and work towards that vision unceasingly, unflinchingly, right? So what the reason we get into these crises is because we're always reactive. We wait until the bad people and bad forces do something, and then we react to them, right? Like I don't understand why we haven't codified abortion and the protection of women's bodies, period. Why did we wait so long with Roe v. Wade? Like that could be overturned and could be undone. Why didn't we take opportunity when we had it to codify this so that people cannot come and reverse it, right? This is why I always emphasize long-term when we do anything, right? We have to set things in place and work towards a vision, not be always reactive to what others are doing, right? And so when, with regards to democracy at this point, that's all we've done is be reactive sometimes, right? Somebody kills a Black man, we all go out and protest, and then we go back to sleep. And the same number of Black people get murdered the following year as the year previous to George Floyd. It makes no goddamn sense. We have to keep working towards a vision consistently over the long term, together, hand in hand, right? Across borders, across tribes. We have to keep doing this work consistently across time, not just when something bad happens, we react to it, right? I hope the COVID pandemic taught us something. And if it taught us anything, is to be prepared ahead of time, not wait till something is a crisis and is killing us before we react to it. It's really deeply disappointing that hardly anyone today has a vision and is working towards it. You just keep working towards stuff, right? I have a vision for what Western Academy should look like. I'm going to keep working towards it, right? And if I need to step on toes and disrespect people and disrespect laws that are in place at my institution, I'm just going to fucking do that, and then apologize later and keep doing it. So I have a vision, and I keep working towards that vision, no matter what's happening outside of that in the world. I don't care. It's a vision that I'm working towards, and I keep working towards it with all the human power and non-human power along with me, right? So I don't ever go it alone.
Okay, we are just about done. We have a couple minutes. There's one more question. Are you an anonymous attendee would like to know if you are writing a book?
Yeah, I've had people tell me I should, and maybe someday, but I don't. It's very important that this not be about me. It's very important that people learn the lessons, right? I don't matter. I'm going to become worm food someday and go be with my ancestors. The important thing is that people learn how to live in a way that actually embodies a bright future for all of us to move forward together with. So hopefully you've taken that away, but maybe someday. I've not gotten any publishers that are interested, but maybe someday. But it's very important that this not become about any individuals.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Joseph, that was amazing. I appreciate your time, your efforts, your knowledge, and your honesty. I mean, that's what traditional ecological knowledge is about being respectful and honest about relations and how those relations inform everything we do. So thank you for your time, and thanks so much for facilitating and moderating. We have a few more minutes before our next session, so let's take a 5-minute break and we will be back soon.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.